Chris Coulter from Coulter Wines in the Barossa Valley. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
I'm really good, mate. Yourself?
Yeah, really well. Look, it's a really muggy, humid day up in Queensland. Not sure what the weather's like down in the Barossa. Fingers crossed it's delightful, but we're here to talk about wine. So, I'm just delighted to be able to talk to you. So let's get down to business. Coulter Wines, it's a project. You started off the advice you got from a friend. That's sort of where you are now. But if we take a step backwards, what I'm absolutely fascinated to talk to you about is your life before wine and how that led to you getting involved in the wine industry and then starting off your side project. You were a chef.
Yeah. So just to take a step back from that, so I grew up on a dairy property in the Yarra Valley, which I think gave me a bit of a pre-experience of wine. And my father was a collector of wine. He had a lot of great old Australian wines that I look at in retrospect now. When I was 10 years old, I didn't really see the significance of some of these wines, but he had some old, Potts Bleasdale, some old Morris O'Shea wines. And now I look back on that experience, that kind of set me up. It gave me that intrigue into wine. So then I became a chef at around about 15 years old. So I just wanted to leave school, and my mother said, "You can leave school, you've got to find a job. So I'll fix you. I'll go and get apprenticeship as a chef," which I did. I worked as a chef for 22 odd years. And then at 35, I did a winemaking degree. So it's basically a applied science degree in enology.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about chefing for a second? Why chefing? Of all the different things you could have done, all the different apprentices, etc., you went to the kitchen. Why was that?
I think it was, it was probably a bit of a means to an end for me.
Yeah.
I really wanted to leave school. I found school boring. I was just getting in trouble all the time. I just wanted to get out and earn some money. And I had a couple of mates who were chefs, and, every time I'd go and see them at the back of the kitchen, they'd have cigarettes and beers. And I thought that this looks like a pretty cool profession to be in. So that's probably what swayed my decision. And taking everything that I know now back to the kitchen, I'm so glad I did it, because it's such a rewarding environment. It's a hard environment, but you meet amazing people. You get to taste amazing food. You get to work with amazing products, and it's very similar to the wine industry in the fact that it's very passion driven. You don't get a lot of people long-term hospitality who don't love it, and I think that's similar to wine. You don't get a lot of people in the wine industry long-term who don't love it. Mm-hmm. So it's probably in a subconscious sort of way set me up for what I'm doing now.
Okay. And you were a chef for 22 odd years. That's a really, really long time. You must have been pretty good at what you did. Can you just give us a walkthrough of where you were, the sort of things that you liked doing, etc.? Bit of insight into chef life.
Yeah. Okay. So I started my apprenticeship at 15. I worked for a couple of Italians in Blackburn in Melbourne. And that was a bit of a baptism of fire, because they expected a lot, but on the other side of the coin, so welcoming. Italians, if anyone who's listening has ever worked with them or knows them, they take you in like one of their own.
Yeah.
And that was a fantastic experience. Then I shifted to Queensland and then ended up working on Dunk Island as a chef up in a resort there. That was an amazing experience. And then I ended up running kitchens in Toowoomba. So look, cooking taught me discipline and leadership and attention to detail, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great career.
Intense, and they're high intense environments. I mean, I've spent a little bit of time in kitchens, and it was nothing I did sort of growing up. I went from school to university into the professional life, and it was sort of I hit a stage where I actually wanted to explore a lot of things that I never had the opportunity to explore. And I had some very accommodating friends who let me come in and do some hospitality work over a period of time. And it was awesome. insofar as I got to see a world that I hadn't previously experienced, and the perception I had of it was just completely revamped. It was high intensity, so organized, hierarchy, just a really terrific environment. And I really kind of regret not actually taking the time maybe while I was at uni to go into those environments, because I think you learn so much from it in terms of just general life skills.
Yeah, absolutely. What you just said is exactly right. It's organised chaos to a certain degree. So it's an environment where we are so busy and put under pressure that you're falling back to structures and discipline and what you have actually learned, what you've been trained to do. And I think winemaking, particularly in vintage, has a lot of crossovers to that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, kitchens are great. I had a brilliant time in the kitchen, and I met some really interesting characters.
Okay.
You meet some really different people.
Yep. Okay. At what stage did it occur to you? So you're in the kitchen cooking up, Michelin star meals. What point did you go, I'm done with this? I want to go into the wine world.
Probably the time I was running kitchens. It would have been around 2005. Mm-hmm. Things were just getting a little bit ahead of me. I wasn't enjoying my work. I was working nights. I was working weekends. And I also got a bit of an interest in wine, got the bug, and did a couple of vintages, and then I was hooked after that.
Mm-hmm. And you were at Coldstream Hills, I believe, for a little while.
I worked at Coldstream Hills. I worked at Mac Forbes. I worked at De Bortley, Helens Hill in the Yarra Valley. They were the first four places I worked, which were all amazing, and gave me a great insight.
Yeah. What was that introduction like? Did you start like at the very, very bottom, coming from a kitchen where you would have been exposed to a wide variety of wines? I imagine you would have had some sort of knowledge going in. But what was it like making that transition from kitchen to, wine world?
I actually found it quite easy because coming from a kitchen where you literally just run all day and you don't stop, you don't sit down like a cup of coffee. That's your lunch. So going to a winery where again it's busy, but it's a more methodical approach. You've got a little bit more time to think about what you're doing. And I think that's what I loved about winemaking is coming from an environment where you're always under pressure to perform to an environment where there's still pressure to perform, but you've got more time to analyse what's happening and make a more informed decision about what you do. I think that's what I love about winemaking. Winemaking is literally, for me, about taking all the bits of information and using those to make the right decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Talk to me about wine school. So there seems to be a very prominent school that a lot of people go through. But what I'm really interested in is people say, you learn to make wine and you learn most things about being a good winemaker in the vineyard. So when you went to wine school, what was that process like? What did you learn there? And how did that vary from the experience you got being, I guess, a cellar rat in those initial phases and then slowly progressing through your career?
Yeah, so look, university it's an applied science degree. And that's correct. You do learn most of your winemaking skills in the cellar or in the winery. But what university did for me is teach me to research. And I think that's really important. And reading is one thing, but actually interpreting information that you read is a totally different skill. And I think that's what university gave me. So I left university with a lot more awareness of how to, again, interpret results, get that information in front of you and use it correctly.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, very much. And early days in the wine world, what was it that influenced you most? I mean, it was, you described you had a bug and you've obviously caught that bug. You've taken wine to that next step. You've launched your own project. You're making extraordinarily good wines. What do you think it was in those initial phases that gave you this, I guess you'd call it a positive trajectory? Were there certain people influenced you or opportunities you got?
I think it was just a desire to do something really good and live up to my own expectations. I'm a perfectionist by nature, so that has always been part of who I am, and I have to accept that. At times it gets a bit tedious, but I think coming into winemaking and seeing what other people were doing definitely has been a big part of it. I've got a lot of friends that we sit and drink wine together, and we'll sit there and dissect them and argue and, you know, even yell at each other about how we interpret a certain wine. That's the beauty of it. It's just, again, it's like food. There's no right and wrong answer. Just because you like a wine, that doesn't mean it's a good wine.
Yeah.
And just because you say you see a certain attribute in a wine doesn't necessarily mean other people will see that. So it's an industry where opinions rage and egos can rage, but you really need to sort of pull yourself back from that and again take it for what it is, and just try to do the best you interpret with what you've been given.
Yeah, and can I just jump on that point, because that's not something that I hear an awful lot from people. I mean, everybody, I think it's maybe an elephant in the room. Everybody knows the egos and the big personalities are there, but I guess from my experience in talking to people, a lot of people emphasize the collegiality and the friendliness and the willingness to help out there is in the wine industry. But everybody would know, you know, a winemaker, to my mind, is almost like a magician that makes this incredible product based on the elements that they churn out to people, and people have these ethereal experiences with. And that can result, when you make something that good, that brings that much happiness to people, I can imagine the egos getting inflated. Talk to me a little bit about that. Tell me about the darker side of the wine industry.
Okay. Look, I don't think it's the darker side, but there's certainly ego. Yeah. But I think ego is good. It's there's nothing wrong with. I'm trying to think of some more flamboyant characters out there. I won't name any people, but they're certainly around. But I like those people. They're the ones who get in people's faces and they create conversation and they put thoughts into people's heads. The only reason this industry is going from strength to strength at the moment is because people are just pushing those boundaries, particularly in terms of some of the wine styles that are getting around that were maybe losing traction now, but 5 years ago were really gaining a lot of momentum, like more sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Traditional wine styles. I don't want to go and say that word natural, but those wine styles are really pushed boundaries for a lot of people. I'm probably babbling a bit now, but look, I think egos within the industry are really important. But again, there's nothing wrong with pushing your own agenda, but also be receptive to what other people are doing. I think that's really important. And I'm glad you touched on the collegial side of it, because this industry is so tight.
Yeah.
Some of the guys I know, totally different wine styles to mine, business owners, maybe in competition with me, but in terms of sharing information, the generosity is just amazing. So it's a really cool industry to be in.
That's something I've been really fascinated to hear about, how many winemakers or wine personalities got their start because they started talking to another winemaker who said, hey, come on and give me a hand, or people banding together for a common cause to push something, I guess. Like you got your first families of wine, I guess, who, you know, quite big scale, but have banded together to try and promote Australian wine internationally. And that's something I might ask you about in terms of the changing direction of wine. You said the word traditional, and then people throw words around like natural, organic, biodynamic, etc. What is it that has sort of, it seems generally there has been a bit of a shift in direction in terms of those more traditional winemaking methods. And to your mind, what has influenced and or caused that?
So I think it's important we just think about those three terms you use. So natural is, I suppose the natural, it's a really hard one. Again, we could get 10 different winemakers and have 10 opinions on this. my interpretation of natural wine is guys that don't add any sulfur, I think. But sulfur is a natural element. So therefore, my wines by default are natural, in my opinion. I'm putting a disclaimer there right now. That's my opinion, and yeah. I respect other people's differing opinions. When you talk about organic and biodynamic, that's more vineyard practices. And I think those two practices in the vineyard are really, really important. I really love biodynamicism, I think you pronounce it, and organic practices also very, very good for the environment, and done correctly can just produce some phenomenal fruit. I think a really good example of that is Ron Lawton up at Jasper Hill. He does his biodynamic in his vineyard, and his vineyard is just pristine. So that's the first part of it. Then the second question of where have these styles come from, like the more natural style, I think it's more, there's probably a few parts to that, but I think people in general, or the consumers in general, are more conscious about what they're putting in their bodies. So chemicals are definitely something a lot of, particularly younger people, don't want to take into their bodies or support being used in grape growing. And the next part of that is a lot of consumers out there are looking for something a little bit more different, maybe a bit more edgy, again, more thoughtful in the way they've gone about the practice of making that wine. I think for producers like me, I'm totally comfortable with how I do everything I do. My wines are definitely not natural. I try to be as clean and efficient as possible and just look after every minute detail. But I'm thoughtful in what I do. I think some of the bigger companies in the past have used a lot of chemicals growing their fruit, and that has kind of got some negative feedback in the media. So yeah, it's a really, really vast question.
Mm-hmm. If you put aside, I guess, the health implications of it from a consumer perspective, this is something I like talking to people about, because I think it's something that is sort of increasingly hitting consumers in the face when they walk into bottle-os, and they'll see maybe a label under a bottle saying organic or something, and they go, do I buy that one or do I buy that one? What's with the non-label? What's going to give me a better wine drinking experience? Is there a noticeable difference in an organic or even a next level biodynamic wine than there is with one that hasn't been made using those practices?
Not necessarily. It's more a little bit more respect, I suppose, for the environment. Where organic or biodynamic wines, there's not a lot of chemicals used in the vineyard, but if someone's using heavy chemical sprays in the vineyard, what's the implications for our environment? Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm not an expert on that, but I think if I was given two wines, a commercial wine that I knew had been sprayed with synthetic chemicals, etc., or an organic wine, I would go the organic wine every day of the week, and that's more just out of having a bit more thought about our environment. So
it's sort of it's a philosophy underpinning the wine, kind of.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's, I think people are aware of this more and more. We are, as a race, are understanding the damage we're doing to our planet, not just through the chemicals we use, but the practices in agriculture, deforestation, all this sort of stuff, and it's more and more in our face. And I look at it as something that I'm not happy we've gone down this path, but there's not a lot I can do about it. I can only play my part. But my kids, my son's 12 and my daughter's 9, they're highly aware of what man is doing to this planet. And I don't know if they will do anything in their lives, but I think their kids will. So I'm probably getting a little bit philosophical now, but this is very important to me. I think we, as a race, we really need to wake up and look after what we're doing to our planet and be aware of our practices on the earth and the soil and the environment.
Yep. Because there does seem to be a massive, almost holistic movement in the wine industry and awareness of these things. And there seem to be more and more people sort of changing the directions in favor of those more traditional making methods. Can we talk about Coulter Wines?
Yeah.
So I've read there was a friend of yours who was in a very, very resourceful way making brilliant wines. And you sit down, you have a chat with him. Next minute, you've launched your own baby, your side hustle, which turns into Coulter Wines. And you're making, not long after, top shelf wines, which are getting terrific reviews. Short version, can you unpack that for me?
Okay, so I caught up with a mate who I went through university with. He was living in Melbourne, he'd started his label, and I was working for a massive company, had access to this huge winery with all this equipment, and I was doing nothing. And I caught up with him, and we sat down one night and shared a few glasses of wine, and I walked away from that encounter, and I was like, God, this guy is just killing it. What am I doing? I need to get amongst it. So walked away from that. And then that same, I think it was the next vintage, would have been 2015. I bought a ton of Sangiovese grapes and did a 100% whole bunch Sangiovese ferment, bottled it, sold out in about 3 months, and just went on from there. So that was 15. 16, I did Sangiovese, Chardonnay, and Barbera, all from the Adelaide Hills. Again, sold out very quickly, and it's just escalated from there. So it's been a fairly rapid trajectory, but it's so much. I'm having so much fun doing it. There's a lot of challenges surrounding it, but it's been a real expedited growth. And the guy I caught up with, his name's Sam. I'll give him a plug. So the wine brand is Conpiramaru, and there are a couple of mates of mine. So there's Sam Cook and Alistair. Can't even think of his bloody name. Anyway, and they've got their own wine brand, but they're doing some really interesting stuff, and they're kicking goals as well. So those guys were probably the inspiration for me getting off my ass and doing something.
Okay. Number of questions I want to ask off the back of that. So you're obviously, you've mentioned you're a perfectionist. I mean, I guess you'd have to be to make wines of the quality you're making. But how much work goes into that? I understand that it started as a side hustle. So you're making wines for somebody else by day, by night, when you're in your own time. You're investing your heart and soul into this thing that you're extremely passionate about. I mean, is that as all-consuming as it sounds?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's I think about it all the time, but I love it. So it's not a job; it's a passion. Absolutely, I consider my work my hobby. If I wasn't earning money doing it, I'd probably do it anyway. So yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And you said you were sitting around on your ass doing nothing, and these friends came along and inspired you. I imagine you weren't literally doing nothing. I mean, you were working for a bigger winemaker. Am I kind of correct?
You are, yeah, you're correct. Oh, look, I'm probably being a bit hard on myself, but I was doing a day job, and that was it.
Yeah. Well, what is the difference?
Most of us can do more.
Yeah. Okay. And what is the difference between big winery practices and smaller winery practices? It's something I'm very interested in talking about in terms of the contrast between your really, really small family-owned run wineries. Maybe an example is yours. It's pretty much you. It's what you pour your heart and soul in. And then you've got Treasury Estates over here who have an umbrella of 50 million different wineries underneath. And there is at the core of that, I think I'd be safe in saying, they both want to make wine. They both want to make good wine, but the philosophy is different at the end of the day. What are your perspectives on that point?
Look, I think it comes down to more access to resources. So you're a lawyer, correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So if you're working for a big firm, and let's say you had 10 associates and whatever, I'm not sure how all the terms, versus you, little shop in Koran there practicing law. This side, you would have so many more resources, but your job would be very pigeonholed to a couple of issues or a couple of specialities, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yet over here, you lack of resources, sort of doing it hard in the trenches, but so much more fulfillment in your job. I would imagine. I think that's how I see it. So as a small winery, you're sort of doing everything. You're making all the decisions. You're covering a broad spectrum of parts of the process. So fruit sourcing, wine making, label design, bottling, logistics, accounts, marketing. Whereas in a big company, as a winemaker, you would look after maybe white wine, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference I see.
Okay. Over the course of the journey you've had so far, could we spend a little bit of time talking about highs and lows? So in preparation for this interview, I tried to do a little bit of a scouring around, a bit of reading up, and I found an interview you'd done for a mob up here in Queensland, of all places. One of the few places up here that I think are selling your wines. I understand they can be a little difficult to track down on this side of the border. But you said that more words to the effect of, there aren't necessarily low points. It's always a struggle. And when you're investing your heart and soul into something, is that the case? Have there ever been moments where you remember going, that was the turning point, that was the low point that sort of led to this upward trajectory? And then equally and oppositely, are there moments where you've gone, that was the pinnacle of this moment, that's where I knew that this was going to turn into something really, really special?
Look, yeah, I'll stick with that story. The low points, I don't think there is any low points. There's certainly been challenges. I think probably one of the hardest periods for me was, I reckon around March 2020, when we had that first or March or April, that first sort of COVID response in the country, and businesses started shutting down. People weren't buying. Cash flow came to just about a grinding halt. I found that period from sort of March through to around July, August, September, very difficult, because I'd bought a lot of fruit and I wasn't being able to pay my growers. That was really difficult. But coming out of that has been really promising, because I think there's been a lot of positivity after that period. We're still in a fairly tough period in the industry, but there is still some positivity. So look, I wouldn't say there's any low points, but it's a challenge. It's always a challenge. You can't just sit back. You need to be out there, pushing your brand, building awareness, talking to people, looking at new ideas. And then for 3 months of the year, you sort of head down, bum up in vintage, so you're not really doing anything at all.
Yep.
So outside that period, that's when you need to be really working. Inside vintage, just focus on making wine, get the wines right, and then everything looks after itself after that. If you make good wine, you're halfway there.
Yeah. Okay. And once you've made good wine, you sell it. Where do you sell it? What's the scope of where you target? And for people up here in Queensland, is it best to go to you directly to get your booze?
Look, they can certainly come to me directly. There's a few places up there who stock it. So there's Bedica is one place. Black Sheep Bottle Shops have it. Who else up there has it? I can't even think. I can let you know if you like.
That'd be terrific. Yeah.
Some information on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I sell quite a lot in Melbourne. I've got a distributor in Melbourne who sells quite a lot. I've got a distributor in South Australia, one in Western Australia, and I also sell a little bit in the UK and occasionally a little bit into Singapore. And then, just around the country, I'll get a little bit of traction through the website. do wine shows. So it might go to like a tasting event, say a Cellar Door Fest or Urban Wine Walk, and you've got an opportunity to sell to people directly. So yeah, sales are tough. It's hard to sell wine, but the more sales you get, the more brand awareness you get, the easier it becomes. But I wouldn't say it's easy.
Mm-hmm. And in a market with an increasing number of wineries, how do you distinguish yourself from everybody else? Is that just attention to detail in terms of the quality of the product you churn out? Reputation, what goes into that? I mean, that's probably I'm not sure it could be a stupid question, but I thought I'd ask it anyway.
Yeah. Look, I think the baseline level you have to hit is wine has to be good and the packaging has to be appealing. You get those two things right, then you can start sort of building on that. And yeah, reputation is certainly part of it. Awareness, that saying, you can't sell a secret, and that's so true. And it's exposure, just getting your wines out there. The more people talking about it, the more people drinking the wines, the more bottle shops they're in. That will create an exponential growth in sales.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of, I guess, sales and marketing, etc., I had a lot of fun on your website. I thought it was terrific, very educational, really gave succinct descriptions of all the different wines and what goes into them, your story, your philosophy. What I wanted to do was just devote a couple of minutes to wine education, because the summary of what you do, there were some key terms there that I thought would be really interesting to just take a moment and unpack, both for my own education and the listeners, because it's kind of what makes wine sound mysterious and highfalutin, but then an understanding of that can make you really appreciate what is going on in the bottle, what went into making that wine, and therefore enhance your consumer experience. But if I can just hit two terms to start with: small batch and minimal intervention. What does that mean?
Okay.
And what influence does that, what impact does that have on the wine that you're making?
Okay, so with a small batch, there's more focus on that actual batch. You're handling it with more care. So in terms of your fermentation, you're keeping a really close eye on your nutrient level and your temperature and the behaviour of the ferment. You've got the opportunity to hand plunge it, so that's really gentle on the what's the word I'm looking for? So you know about your cap. So you try to keep your cap cool, because your cap is where all your berries sit. As the ferment's going along, all the heat comes to the top, so you can submerge that cap. So it's a very gentle extraction method. Basket pressing is really important for reds. So again, a basket press versus a bag press is a lot more gentle. And just being more hands-on and seeing what's happening with the wine in real time. Don't get me wrong, you can make great wines from larger batches, but they do tend to get thrashed around a little bit, so they get pumped around. Small batch, you can basket press, gravity feed, just all very gentle on the wine. The second, minimal intervention. So I've actually changed my ethos on that. It's still minimal intervention, but maximum attention. So let's not intervene if we don't have to, but let's pay 100% attention to what we're doing.
Yep.
That's the goalpost. Sometimes that doesn't work out. Sometimes it's some intervention and less attention if you're busy, but that's the ethos. Minimal intervention. So let's not do anything if we don't have to. Let's look after it. Let the ferment be happy in itself, and we intervene if and when we have to. But let's pay maximum attention to what's going on, temperature, the way we plunge it, any nutrients we need to add to that. That's how we work.
Mm-hmm. It's a really interesting idea to talk about, because minimal intervention, I guess wine is one of those few products where I guess if you take grapes and just stick them in a bucket and leave it long enough, the wine may not be good, but there's going to be a natural fermentation process that takes place, and wine is it's a very natural process, whereas other things that might take place in a kitchen, minimal intervention might result in something sort of completely different. So just from a consumer standpoint, is there a positive element to minimal intervention but maximum attention winemaking?
Oh, absolutely. So the wine's not being moved around and played with as much. So if you've got, I'm trying to think of a good example. So Pinot Noir is a great example. It doesn't like to be moved. So if you've got, let's say we've got 8 barrels of Pinot Noir and you want to pump them into a tank to get a ferment restarted if it's got stuck. So ferments get stuck. Sometimes the yeast because you've got natural yeast in there, the yeast putters out. You need to get that into a tank and do something to it. So get a restart happening. That movement from barrel to tank and back to barrel is not good for the wine. The more you move it, the more finesse you take out of the wine. So all the best wines I've made have had 0 movements. And when you do move it by gravity. So when I talk about minimal intervention, yes, I want that Pinot Noir in barrel to go through ferment and not have to do anything to it. So that's the philosophy behind that. So minimal intervention, yes, will make a better wine.
Okay. You also have, a focus on creating regionality and varietally expressive wines. So could we just take a moment, talk a little bit about where you are and the factors you have to take into account in terms of making wines where you are, and then what you make, the varieties you make, and your thoughts on those, why you chose those varieties.
Mm-hmm. So what you want to know about the regional characteristics of the wines I make and why I make the varieties I make?
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay, so look, I live in the Barossa, but the brand comes out of the Adelaide Hills. And the reason I chose the Adelaide Hills to start making wines, it just reminds me of the Yarra Valley, so cooler climate. Very similar varieties to what you'd see in the Yarra, so, Chardonnay, Pinot Noir. I also do a Barbera, Tempranillo, and a Gamay out of the Adelaide Hills. So Adelaide Hills, more acid retention, more sort of precision on in the fruit. The varieties I work with, Chardonnay would be the favourite. So I make an Adelaide Hills Chardonnay, which is barrel fermented. That's just a great wine to work with. I love making that wine. So it comes in as whole bunch, just press it and put it straight into barrel as dirty juice and just let the ferment kick off. So when I run that juice to barrel, it looks like dam water. It's brown. And the first time I ever did that technique, because I'd been told about that technique by a guy I worked with, and he said, yeah, that's fine. It works. And the first time I did it, I ran it to barrel and I saw the color of it. And I was like, my God, what has happened? It was like brown muddy water. Took about 2 or 3 days to kick off in barrel and started ferment, ripped through ferment in barrel, topped it, added sulfur, and the resultant wine, I think, got a 96 off Halliday. So that's the kind of results I've been getting. And I've been taking that fruit from the same vineyard every year. So the vineyard's called Rathmine. It's out of the Chunga. It's a Bernard 76 clone. So it's a Chardonnay clone, quite small berries, unbelievable acid retention, beautiful fruit flavours. So that's a really exciting wine to make. The Pinot Noir, Pinot's a bastard to make, actually. It's a really hard variety to get right. So I was taught to make Pinot by Mac Forbes. He worked with Mount Mary, or worked for Mount Mary. One thing he told me about Pinot, he said, let it run hot, don't cool it. And again, quite a scary thing the first few times you do it. And because ferments get hot, a normal, let's say a Barossa Shiraz ferment, you'd keep it between 24 and 26 degrees. And you may go a little bit higher or lower, depending on your philosophies. My first Pinot ferment ran up to about 35 degrees. and it smelled mushroomy and it was hot. Like you walk past it, you could feel the heat coming off it. And I thought, no, trust in the process. And the wine turned out really well.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, that was really exciting. Pinot is definitely a wine. The more I make, the more I'm learning about it. Look, Barbera, Sangiovese, Tempranillo, they're just really fun to work with because they're totally different to anything else we make in a traditional winery. And this year I managed to get hold of some Gamay fruit, and that's been really exciting. Again, quite a good fun variety to make. So, yeah, Adelaide Hills, precision, good acid retention, great colour, good fine sort of wine. So they're not big, bold, fruit-driven wines. They're finer, but quite bright and accessible as young wines.
Okay. Is there much that you take into account in terms of consumer trends, in terms of what varieties, etc., you're going to make? A lot of those are European varieties, which have a different, I guess, kind of a different characteristic to your big, bold, massive Barossa Shiraz. Do you make those? I mean, you said you're passionate about them and you just find them interesting and fun varietals to work with. But is there much examination of what people are drinking out there in terms of your decision making?
No, not really. No, I do what I like because I think at the end of the day, I've got to stand behind the varieties I make and convince people that these are good wines. And it's not hard to convince people of something if you believe it yourself, I think. But it's funny because I suppose my wine drinking journey and trajectory is probably like a lot of other people in that I'm exploring new things. I like European style wines. So that just happens to work in with a lot of people. So when I first started making wine, one thing I really wanted to do was get that early release wines out there, because as a winemaker, so just to step back a bit, so let's say we've done vintage 2015 in the Barossa Valley. I'm looking at Shiraz and Cabernet in barrel with 5 months of age. And I see these bright, aggressive, tannin-driven structural wines with bright purple colours. The consumers don't get to see that. And I thought to myself, I want to get that experience out to consumers. So that's why I released the wines quite early. So that's something I believe, and it just happens that people have really embraced that philosophy. Quite a lot of people are doing it at the moment. I'm not the first, and I won't be the last to have done that. But people like young wines, and people like what's the word I'm looking for? Quite subtle, acid-driven, expressive wines as well. So.
Yep. Projects you're undertaking now and going into the future, is there anything massive going on at Coulter Wines, or is it business as usual, making wonderful, wonderful wines?
Yeah, I'll actually show you something. I just saw that at the corner of my eye. So that's a dummy bottle, but this is if you can read that, it's a Sangiovese Cabernet.
Yes.
That's just a mock-up. But the real label will have diamond point gold embossed, so it's going to look pretty flash.
Yeah.
So that will be our super premium. So that'll RRP around $50. It's some really good Sangiovese and Cabernet fruit from Adelaide. Bigger wine, brilliant, like bright cherry red, great acid, really good structure. So that's new for us. In terms of what else is new, I don't know. Vintage is around the corner, so we'll see what comes up.
Mm-hmm.
There's always something happening. We're always trying something new.
Yep. That's what makes it such an exciting industry. Another question for you personally. So I ask this to everybody if given the opportunity. And a lot of people, they say that at one point in their life, there's a wine experience they've had that either influenced or changed their lives forever. In terms of they drank something that made them just go, oh my gosh, wine is the nectar of the gods. Not everybody has that experience. I guess some people say, oh, the wine I had last night was the nicest wine I've ever had. Or another person may say, I had a Bordeaux that was 50 years old that just made me want to leave my career and go into the wine world. What was that for you? Have you had that experience, or is it sort of just a continual flow of trying new and wonderful things all the time?
Yeah, I've had an experience I'd like to talk about. It probably wasn't a defining moment for me, but it certainly made me prick my ears up about how special this industry is. A really good mate of mine, he's the fine wine manager at Prince Wine Store in Melbourne. His name's Roscoe. He's a fantastic guy. And one year I went to his birthday party, and we all went out and we drank and whatever else. We all came back to his apartment, and it was about 2 a.m. And he had a bottle of 2001 Chateau Yquem, so 100-point Parker wine. And it was a bottle, not a half bottle. He cracked this wine, and then the next thing, we were sitting there and everyone had gone. So the 10 people had sort of rocked up to his place. Half an hour later, they'd sort of all disappeared. So myself and Roscoe sat there and drank this wine. There was actually one other guy there, I lie, another fellow. But we were drinking this, and you'd swallow it, and then you'd time the length of this wine. You could still taste it in your mouth after a minute. And I've never ever had that sort of experience. So that was a defining moment for me. Just like, it's a dessert wine, and I'm not necessarily a dessert wine fiend, and I'm sure a lot of people would write off Yquem and say, oh, it's a sweet wine. Of course, people like it, but we could taste lemons and limes on the back of our palate a minute later.
Yep.
So anyone who knows about wine would agree that's got to be something fairly special.
Yep. That's incredible. I haven't had an experience like that. Fingers crossed, maybe one day I will. I'm still waiting for it. My last question for you, Chris. So we've spent a lot of time talking about your winemaking, your career, what influenced that. Something we haven't really spoken about, but I know it has a big impact on you. It's something you're very passionate about is your family. I know you've got a couple of kids. You've got a beautiful wife. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What influence they have on you, a little bit of the story, and how they interact with your wine experience.
Okay, so yeah, my wife Rebecca, we met when we were in our early 20s. We had 2 children. So my son's 12, my daughter's 9, Keegan and Riley. Look, we're a very, very close family. We spend a lot of time together. We're very supportive of each other. We really encourage communication and love and respect for each other within the household. Look, they're my biggest supporters. Yeah, it doesn't matter what's going on. If I've done good or done bad, they're very supportive of what I do. And they're certainly very, very aware of what's happening with the brand. My son gets on his phone and Googles me and says, "Oh, Dad, someone's put a review on about you," and all this sort of stuff. So I hope I'm an inspiration to them to achieve what they want to achieve in their life, and nothing will hold them back. I'm sure they will, because they're really, really bright kids. And look, my wife, as much as she loves being involved, she's happy just to take a back seat. I think she likes the peaceful life we live in the Barossa. So yeah, look, they've been massive supporters, absolutely. And they are, people talk about their rock, they are my rock. Yep. No doubt about that.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Life in the Barossa in, I guess, 60 seconds or less. What's that like? I mean, people may imagine this beautiful green wine devoted valley where everybody's happy and skipping around. Is it as good as it actually sounds?
It's not far from that. Yeah, it's a small. The place we live in is called Tanunda. It's a small little hamlet. I think it's like a population of 4,000 people. You could look that up, actually. Very, very close community. Our kids ride their bikes to see their friends' houses. We catch up with people. We drink wine together. We talk. You go down the supermarket, you'll run into 4 people you know. There's always winemakers' lunches on. There's so much going on. It's a fantastic place. So we love it. It's home.
Yep. Okay. Last question for you, Chris. So, consumers, people like myself wanting to get the most out of their wine drinking experience. What are some tips in terms of being able to take something like this and just appreciate it?
It depends what level you want to absorb yourself, I suppose, or immerse yourself. If you're like me, I like to know why something tastes the way it does. I would say read, talk to other wine people, and drink. You learn so much from drinking, and also drink with friends. Discuss wine. Look, whenever I'm with mates and we open wine, we sit there and discuss it, as I said, and we'll have.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, something just happened, but
yeah, just lost
hear
the earphones. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. So yeah, those things: read, drink, talk, share experiences, and learn about the great regions. So I think, to me, Burgundy is probably the premier region at the moment. Italy, again, your Barolos, your Nebbiolos, your Sangioveses, really important to learn about those. Learn about the great regions of the world. Just have that thirst for knowledge. It's I think you're probably similar to me, Tom. It's not a hard thing for me to go and find out about wine because it's my passion. I'll happily sit back on a Sunday afternoon and read about wine because I enjoy it. Go to the bottle shop, buy the wine that you don't see, that you don't understand. If you pick a wine up and go, my God, what is that? Might be in French or Spanish or from the Canary Islands or from Greece. Buy it. Go and drink it. You won't know what it's about until you've sat and experienced it. Google it, find out about it. Just learn. That's my advice.
I love your thoughts. I was talking to a mate about this the other night. We were sitting down having a bottle of sparkling, and we were talking about the spirituality of wine, and that means different things to different people. I'm a Catholic, so wine is such a part of what I do religiously, which I absolutely love. It just takes on this whole other meaning. But you've got, a liquid in a bottle that has 6,000 years of history, that has different expressions from all these different countries. So much history within those different countries, the Romans, the Etruscans in Italy, the Armenians in Armenia and Georgia. And it's this one liquid that you can sit there with somebody that's close to you, and you don't have to say a word, but you can have a magical evening all over something in a bottle. I mean, I love beer, but I don't feel like I can actually do that with beer. I'm not sure whether that makes me weird. But it's also, as you said, I think it's just that thirst for knowledge. It's a cultural experience brought to you by a drink. How doesn't get better than that to me?
Yeah. What are you drinking there, by the way?
This is Balmain Riesling, Pemberton, Western Australia, off dry.
Okay.
It's quite nice. It's quite off dry. So I grabbed it in the fridge on the way down. I thought I've got to have a drink while I'm talking with Chris, and it's got a bit of an edge to it. Sort of honeysuckle, quite citrusy. I'd had it before. Maybe the honeysuckleness, etc., caught me a little bit off guard. It's quite off dry, but it's a lovely, lovely drop. And, I think it would go really well with some Thai or something like that. But
lovely.
I'll enjoy it. Yeah. Well,
Riesling's good.
Yeah, love Riesling. One of my favorites going around at the moment. But also exploring those exotic varietals. So, and I really look forward to getting around some of the stuff you're doing. So really appreciate your time today.
No worries. Thank you, Tom. Great to talk, mate.
No, I really appreciate it. Chris Coulter from the Barossa is somebody who believes in crafting magical wines with minimal intervention, but maximum attention. Chris, thanks so much again.
Okay. Thanks, Tom.